So let's do some of the same practice except with our GDP deflator. So remember, GDP deflator looks at the changes in prices across the entire economy. Now, as we're doing this, what I want us to see is I did note that our point of reference, 2009, is going to be our base year. Now, the only reason that matters for anything is some of you might have looked at that and been like, hold on, these GDP deflator numbers look really low. Why is that? Well, again, remember, in our base year, 2009, it's going to be 100. And since we're, 50 years prior to that, 60 years, 70 years prior to that, we're dealing with much smaller numbers. So that's the only reason that's there, is for that point of reference. So let's go ahead and take a look. But before we do that, we need to remind ourselves of our GDP deflator equation. And remember, we said it's our nominal GDP, so lowercase n for nominal, divided by our real GDP times 100. And that'll give us our GDP deflator. So we can do that with this first one. In 1944, we saw that our nominal GDP was 224.6, and we divide that by 2,239.4 times 100. Do the algebra, plug it in, and we end up getting a deflator of 10.03 in 1944. Let's go ahead and move to this next one. If you notice, again, we're missing our nominal here. So if we kind of plug in what we do have, we don't have our nominal, but we do have our real GDP. It's 2,217.8 times 100 is going to get us 10.29. And so again, we can kind of work the algebra. We divide both sides by 100, and then we multiply both sides by 2,217.8. And what we end up getting for our nominal GDP here, we should end up with 228.2. If you guys notice, I had said that this is in billions of dollars, just so you know, it's not $228. It's in billions. And so we're just doing it this way for now because it makes it easier than writing out all of those zeros. All right, let's move on to this next one. This next one, we're missing our real GDP for 1946. But again, we can plug in what we do know. We do know that our nominal GDP is 227.8. We divide that by our real GDP, which we currently don't know, times 100 is going to get us 11.62. And again, divide both sides by 100, and then do all the dividing out by 227.8, all that kind of stuff. We end up with a real GDP of 1,960.4. Now, if you guys notice, I only went to one decimal here. I typically say round to two decimals, but really, I'd encourage you just follow my example, whatever I'm doing. If I'm rounding to one decimal, round to one. If it's rounding to two, round to two, All right. And then finally, let's do this last one. This last one, once again, we're just missing the deflator, so we can plug in our nominal GDP. Then we can plug in our real GDP, 39.4, multiplied by 100. Plug it into a calculator, and you should end up with 12.89. If you remember, we said these deflators are just index numbers, not a percent yet. Okay, the percentages come whenever we solve for inflation. So let's remind ourselves what our inflation formula is. We said it's our year one GDP deflator. Sorry, backtrack, ignore that. It's our year two GDP deflator minus our year one GDP deflator divided by year one GDP deflator times 100. Maybe if I can write 100, there it is, times 100, right? So it's the same way that we used with CPI. So let's go ahead and do that. Remember, year one is always the earlier of the 2 years. Year two is the later of the 2 years. So let's compare 1944 to 1945. So what we have is we have the later of the 2 years. So 1945, we had 10.29 minus 10.03. That gets us 0.26. And then we divide that by the earlier of the 2 years, again, year one, 10.03 times 100. We just plug that into a calculator, and we get a percentage of 2.58. And what that means is between 1944 and 1945, our inflation rate was 2.59%. And that should make sense to us because we said between 1 and 3 is normal, just in normal everyday, a normal economy, right? Now let's look at 1946 to 1947. If we do that, we have 12.89 minus 11.62, right? Because 1947 is our year 2. It's the later of the 2 years. 1946 is the earlier of the 2 years. We divide that by 11.62 times 100, and we end up with a percentage of 10.93%. Prices rose 10.93% in a single year. And again, you might look at this and be like, wow, that is crazy. That's a lot in a single year. But we also have to think about what's going on in the United States at this time. We saw a lot of kind of post-war boom at this time. And so we saw kind of some quick rapid growth, and we said inflation and GDP move in the same direction. So again, this should make sense to us. But that's a little bit of math behind the GDP deflator. Make sure you're really familiar with these formulas and you feel good about this and can work through these problems because they will show up on your test.